So welcome, George and Omar. I appreciate your being with us for this special The Future Society Book Club to basically discuss your latest book. And congratulations on the publication. It's never easy to write and especially finish and publish a book, especially on our topics of common interest around intelligence in general, be it artificial, collective, or common in a way. So what I suggest is that I will give you a little bit of a space to present yourself and present the book and what drove you to the book and what you met around that book and what brings it together. And then we could get into more of a conversation. How does that sound?
Sounds like a plan.
Thank you so much. And very happy to be here. Actually, I'm the more loquacious of us two. So Omar should start with his introduction and his thoughts, if you're okay with that, Omar, and then I will add more.
Yeah, sure. So I've known George actually like 4 years now, approximately, maybe a little bit longer, 5 years. And we met at an innovation conference in New York. And while at lunch, we just, happened to be next to each other. We started talking about artificial intelligence and things like that. And then after a while, I invited him to an event that I used to do here at NASA Cross Industry Innovation Summit. And we started, talking more about that and there's a lot of things are unknown, a lot of things that can be impacting our society, our jobs, our politics, everything. And we said it's definitely worthwhile investing some time and capturing some of these kind of things into a book so people can understand and know what are the implications and what are the impacts and how this single-handed technology is going to be impacting so many things across the board. So that's where we started talking about it. In 2018, we started writing the book and we finally finished it. And it's one of these books, one of these topics that if you wait too long, it becomes kind of obsolete. So the challenge is how to write it. It actually extends a little bit longer time without being outdated information. And then write it in a way that actually makes sense. It's not too complicated technically. It's easier for the readers. It's not tackling one single topic, but tackling multiple topics. So that was a lot of the intricacies and the challenges that we had to go through. But eventually, this is what we had. And when we do, if we do a second edition, obviously, it will be much more updated. And it's one of these topics that's constantly going to be changing.
Yeah, so one of our key statements, I think, in the book is that in the last 3 years since we started writing the book, AI became something that is more and more recognized as a cross-disciplinary domain on its own. So it's going beyond technology. And I think what Omar did with the Cross Industry Innovation Summit is key to our plans. So we are people who see ourselves as connectors. Actually, the title BetweenBrains is trying to illustrate that kind of, interpreters, connectors, conveners type of a role, because we saw when we started writing or even thinking about the book that there's a huge disconnect about AI. And 3 years ago and today, the image with the public has not changed a lot. And the narratives that dominated, especially coming from the media, were forcing the general public in this direction of either celebrating AI or cursing it, and nothing in between. So what we wanted to write was not a textbook, not a purely scientific book or a purely technological book, but focusing on the now and the near term of what is already out there, what are the trajectories that we can draw from there, how it is impacting several aspects of our lives and our works already. And our mission was definitely at its core that of sense making. The readers will decide whether we succeeded in that, but it became something like a panoramic view on all the domains where we see AI is already playing an important role and will play a lot more importance in the future. And we wanted to enable different representatives and leaders of sectors to be able to see what's happening in other sectors, other industries, all through the lens of keeping a balanced worldview. I think balance is something that we lack in our lives right now, in our digital lives around the globe, and we try to to root our efforts in a certain kind of morality and seeking AI's true purpose. What we have seen and what we still see, even if there were some interesting developments lately, is that we have a new kind of technology wave, which is unforeseen in its power and its depth and pervasiveness. And the general public, as well as industry and policy, are playing catch up with that kind of technology. And there's a wide gap in the understanding and the capability to steer that kind of technology right now that needs to be driven by that kind of joint understanding and joint moral dedication, where we are not just lagging behind and running after something that has crawled out of the labs a few years ago, but determining its path. So the book, I would say 90% of the book is trying to investigate these different domains of industry, geopolitics, the AI's effect on democracy, lessons from nature. We are trying to put these problems into perspective and investigate the positive and negative outcomes of that, or the trade-offs that we have to make simply. And in the last chapter, we are trying to envision a framework that is the actual solution. So we are trying not to leave the reader with just problems and challenges. Most of the conferences or that we go to, most of the consulting work that we did or advisory work we did, we're mostly stopping at the level of there's a problem and sooner or later we have to find a solution. We try to envision that framework, and of course that framework needs to be detailed later, but that's what we wanted to achieve.
Yes,
so in a nutshell, that was our intent.
And the interesting thing is, before maybe a couple of decades ago, technology, or even a decade ago, the technology in one single field used to be only applicable to that field. Whether technology is in the medical sector, the transportation, in the financial sector, it used to be a technology that's only specifically made for that one. And then now the lines are blurring between all the industries. So technology along any industry, actually, it's applicable in different ways. Look at 3D printers, originally intended to produce components and parts. Now we can use them to produce food, to produce organs, to create organs with your specific DNA, can be able to produce clothing, produce housing, produce buildings. And so it's, and look at artificial intelligence. It has implications in the medical field, in the legal field, in the financial, in the construction, and absolutely at every single aspect of our lives, right? So that's kind of the beauty is now technology is going to be impacted across all the lines. And of all the emerging technologies, I think artificial intelligence is the one with the highest transferability and cross connectivity across all these sectors. And the problem is people look at technology we have today and they say, okay, well, it cannot do much. Look how basic it is. It's like basically you're seeing a little baby and saying, well, this baby is never going to be able to do anything because it's a baby. So what you need to do is don't think linearly, think in an exponential fashion. And the problem is, as humans, we have evolved to think in a linear fashion. Biologically, we used to be farmers or hunters. So things used to change at a certain delta, a certain speed, while now we're living in an exponential world. So we need to start thinking and embracing that way of thinking to be able to anticipate what's going to happen in the next few years if we're going to be successful in doing it. And we try to tackle some of these issues in the book in different chapters as well.
Just one side to exponentiality, and then I'm handing it back to you because we're holding a too long monologue. But where I live in Silicon Valley, exponentiality is the main narrative, I would say. And in the book, we are trying to put also that kind of exponential thinking under the lens of what is desirable from a civilizational perspective in exponentiality. There are lots of narratives in this exponential domain that are talking about the inevitability of the singularity, inevitability of machines taking over. And I think one of the crucial statements of the book is that nothing is inevitable. Everything needs to be steered, and everything needs to be with a humanistic moral purpose of seeking the true benefit of humanity. And I think currently that is being not done at the right level. So the exponential, 3000.0 is meeting policy and public opinion 1.0. That's the situation where we are, and that's the gap that needs to be bridged today or yesterday.
Well, it would be interesting. So we could spend some time to try and understand the framework that you're proposing towards the end of the book in terms of addressing these challenges. But before, and if you want to share your screen, point to diagrams or anything that you have within the book, more than happy to have a look. But just if this is going to be about AI, it's going to be interesting to understand a little bit what you guys mean when you analyze AI, because AI, means many things to many people, from an omniscient or all-seeing God down the line to a simple set of programs to a social technical imaginary. Some people really now look at the lens of the digital through the prism of artificial intelligence because they focus more on data processing than on telecom networks. Some refuse to do that. So some say, it's big data that's actually working. So what do you mean in the book when you focus on AI? What is AI for you guys?
Yeah. Hey, George, I can talk about maybe the jobs and society. You can talk about politics and ethics. Yeah, you want to start or do you want me to start?
No, you can start. You can start, Omar.
Okay. So one of the things we explore in the book as well is the impact on future jobs. And we look at that from two different angles. So the first one, we understand that it's the technology that for the first time in history, we're not only going to be competing with manual labor, but we're going to be competing with intellect and cognitive abilities. And that's what's the difference about artificial intelligence. It's going to create a new wave. Like with the Industrial Revolution, we're talking about manual labor, so people readapted, did something different. But now we're going into a completely different field, which is intellectual capabilities. So any job that requires intellect or job labors now, it's going to be impacted. And it's transition, it's eventually, as the tools are maturing, we're going to be basically using them as helpers. We're going to be working hand in hand with artificial intelligence to make our jobs better. But then when we reach a level of maturity, much higher level, then there's no need for humans to do most of the things. So the amount of jobs that humans will be required to do will be diminishing substantially, even if we reinvent ourselves, if we retrain ourselves, if we do something creative. Look, just to give you an example about creativity. People say, well, strategy and innovation and creativity will always be traits of humans. And let me give you an example. When AlphaZero beat Stockfish 8, basically, and in 4 hours, so Stockfish is a computer program that had decades of experience in chess and maneuvers and strategies. And AlphaZero, in 4 hours, was able to teach itself without absolutely any data from external data and create moves that some experts thought it was one of the most brilliant strategic moves and creative moves ever done by itself. So imagine how innovation, creativity can be done. We say, no, it cannot be creative, but things are telling you it will be creative, and we're seeing examples here. So the bottom line is it's going to be incredibly impacting every single job, and it's going to be diminishing the role, not taken completely, but a big impact. So put that on the side. And then we're looking at the population increase, and it's incredible how in the span of 200 years, we went from less than 1 billion to 7.5 billion. And then UN estimates in 2050, we're going to have about 10 billion people. And that's another thing we tackle in the book is we think this 10 billion by 2050 is very, very, very conservative. It's not realistic, actually, because that's taken into static models. It's not taken into account the incredible advances we're having in biotech, in genetic engineering, in T cells manipulation, in understanding the fundamentals of aging, in artificial intelligence, detecting diseases before they happen, in 3D printed organs that will be changing the landscape. In 15 years or 20 years, the nanobots will be augmenting our immunity system. So when you combine all these things, all these elements, we're talking about potentially expanding the human average from 75 to 105 to 110, 120 and more. So how is that going to change? So we have incredible population beyond anything we've ever had, let's say 12, 14 billion people, and the roles of humans going to be diminished day after day. So we talk about the current economic models that we have, it's not sustainable. We need to come up with new economic models to be able to look into this future landscape. And then we looked into society as well, how the impact on society, how before people used to interact with each other face-to-face or talk on the phone. And now the new generations, they do over 60% of the communication online or texting. And the phase two, what we call in the book, is basically people spending more time with artificial intelligence entities, where it becomes so advanced it could even know more about you than you know about yourself, right? It's incredibly powerful. You establish extremely good bonds, a good relationship, good trust. And then the challenge we talk about is if somebody could tackle and hack these systems, imagine the power they will be able to have. You can convince you what products to buy, what philosophies to adopt, what kind of political ideologies. So it could be very challenging, right? So just to give you a quick overview of what we're looking at in terms of jobs, society, and the future as well.
So you asked about definitions, Nicolas, and
Scoping.
Because our focus was on trying to cover the many approaches that people and different sectors have on artificial intelligence. We couldn't go with one single definition. What we were focusing about is basically to track all the major definitions and perspectives that different industries and sectors and leaders have or may have on artificial intelligence, and show whether they are, right or not, or what kinds of trade-offs do they lead to. And that's all because our focus from day one was on the impact and demonstrating the impact of artificial intelligence. So if you ask me for my definition, or the simplistic definition that I'm usually using, is that of artificial intelligence is a set of technologies with the ambition to create machines that think and learn. That's my personal definition. It's very much ambitional right now, and actually in the book we are talking about, just using that balanced perspective, how much we think that the narrative of focusing too much on artificial superintelligence or artificial general intelligence is hijacking the conversation from the now, from the present. It has trade-offs. It makes us vulnerable if we are talking about that in the future context as well, or putting too much emphasis. But on the other side, we say that AGI is the next milestone, the next major milestone that researchers are working on. And regardless of the fact that it happens 3 years from now, 10 years from now, or never, there will be a long period when there will be hybrid machines emoting some aspect of human intelligence or human-like capabilities, and we have to tackle that. We have to get prepared for that. So just to give you an example, what Omar said about jobs, if I'm an employer and I have some kind of artificial intelligence solution that replaces the tasks of some of the people that I employ, I will not really care whether that is through AGI, through artificial general intelligence. What I care about is the replaceability of that task, or ultimately of that worker. So I think that there's going to be this long period when artificial narrow intelligence will still be some kind of a baby, but a very powerful baby. And the current frameworks that we have in the world and the current safeguards that we are currently lacking are not preparing us to tackle the problems of today, and will definitely not enable us to tackle an exponential set of problems in the next few years. So I think what we wanted to emphasize is that we were trying to demonstrate these different kinds of viewpoints and definitions of multiple sectors, and try to weave something that is common in them, or demonstrate that your efforts as a politician or as a policymaker do not work or are not apt for an AI age because industry is thinking this way. And unless you understand what is common between your views and that of industry, what is the common ground, we will never get to a set of actionable solutions. So that's just one example, but I can give many.
Would you mind then emphasizing a little bit on the framework? My other question, you mentioned at the end of the book, you have a framework to provide a pathway towards solving for all these challenges. You have I think I would be interested in knowing more about it. If you have, I don't know how you have, bounded it up, or rounded it up in terms of if there is any, if there is, there are any visuals or anything, but that could be interesting.
Well, one of the things.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Omar.
Okay. One of the things that are really important actually is regulations. Regulations are very, very essential and the problem, it's a balance as well, because you don't want to overregulate something and you stifle the creativity and innovation of that aspect, and you don't want to leave it lax where people go crazy. Look, for example, right now about the facial recognition technologies, how invasive it's going to be in people, how it's impacting democracy and everything else like that. So it's the problem is when you're trying to put laws and regulations, it's a long process, takes a long time. And they will never be able to catch with technology, because technology is going to be changing at such a fast speed. By the time you come up with regulation or laws, it's going to be obsolete within certain months or up to a year. So we need to come up with frameworks and laws and regulations that are adaptable, that are forward-looking into how we see the advances and how we see the implications and the effects, and then tackle them from that perspective. And then there's bias and a lot of things that actually we can talk about a lot. But whether it's bias in the data, bias in the algorithms themselves, bias in the system, according to who's creating the algorithms, who's creating the system. So there is a lot of things we definitely need to look at. It's something that could produce incredible results, but if we don't use it properly, it could cause a lot of damage in so many different ways.
So first of all, the bad news, Nicola, I don't have any visuals. And people keep asking us for that after the publication of the book. So probably in the second edition, we will include some. But I am more traditional in that regard. So I like the free flow of text to a lot of diagrams. But to summarize what we had on mind and building on some of the comments that I've already made, what we have envisioned in the last chapter of the book, which is takes the shape of a manifesto, is pointing out the current shortcomings that we have built in and the lack of cooperations and understanding between different stakeholders and sectors, and using a lot of methods that we have seen in the innovation world to build new kinds of structures that are AI fit, AI capable, and AI ready. And of course, so a few aspects of that is like how can you envision collaboration of these different kinds of sectors? How can you create a multi-tiered structure that is fulfilling the objective and the imperative of researching and monitoring all kinds of AI technologies in the world and making moral decisions on what is beneficial to humanity or not. So basically, what are the red flags? What are the early red flags that need to be mitigated, that are too risky if they get out in the world? Currently, we don't have any kind of safeguards like that. You have seen in the last few months that there were like major computer vision solutions that came out on the market, scraping tens of millions of pictures, that actually had hundreds and hundreds of customers in the US, including police. And that we had zero safeguards and zero red flags before that actually came onto the market and became available to clients. So I think that kind of function is very much necessary. But parallelly to that, there are structures that need to be made or need to be built, not necessarily by states only or by policy only, but as multi-stakeholder structures that are actually steering that kind of transformation, AI-driven transformation. What am I talking about here? The jobs example, again, is a great one, because you may think that this is under the radar right now. My personal opinion is that actually a lot of the events in the world that created instability in the last few years have already been, to a large part, due to automation. That's the underlying cause of many of the things that have been repurposed and channeled to us in a different format. But the underlying cause is basically the loss of security and artificial intelligence or machine intelligence replacing human capability and the human added value to the economy is exponentially decreasing as a consequence of that. So this can be a huge problem in the next, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. And I don't think that we have the right kind of monitoring structures right now that are able to intervene, not retroactively, but progressively. I think that kind of like moving with the changes in real time and intervening when necessary is very, very crucial. Currently, our systems are set up to tackle problems that were problems 2.5 years ago, especially in the domain of policy. And the third, go ahead.
I had a mentor of mine from India, 15 years ago, who would go around saying something which is still very valid, which, if I remember well, sounds like this. We have a 19th century mindset, 20th century processes, and 21st century needs. And we need to upgrade all of this. And the we in that case is like anytime when we project a claim based on the we becomes very interesting, especially because of the magnitude of the problems and all socio-technical phenomena that you are, and that we've been trying to wrap ourselves around with you today, which is in essence, at least continental, if not global. So how do you, in a way, address in a way which is respectful and yet meaningful? I just had another event with the European Commission Vice President Vera Jourova in talk with Brad Smith, where Vera Jourova would really advocate and build a very solid case for continental law as the most relevant. And remember, European Union was built upon the principle of subsidiarity, which is trying to push down the responsibility of making law to the lowest common level because of self-determination. So coming from a European commissioner, and at the same, so she was saying that in the matters of digital, because of network effects and so on, continental law is what, and we don't want national governments to take privilege, because we don't want to fragment the regulatory framework. So that's I find this quite interesting.
I very much agree with you, Nicola, and also with the Commissioner Jourova in that regard. Just one note to your friend from India. I think that what even further complicates the situation is troglodyte instincts that we have as humans, what has been exploited by social media and algorithmic manipulation lately. So if you're adding that to the equation as like humans, we are psychologically reacting in ways that have been unchanged, in hundreds of thousands of years, that's problematic. To your point and to subsidiarity, I'm working with a number of countries right now, and who have realized the need for having some kind of direct citizen steering to artificial intelligence, which means that it's not governments only and policymakers. Governments should act as the enablers of citizen well-being. And actually, we are writing about that in the book, in the context of New Zealand and the direction what New Zealand is having in that regard. They said that we are making a hard stance. And the hard stance is that the sole purpose of artificial intelligence is to serve citizen well-being. Case closed. So, I mean, it's a very ambitious statement, but what I'm trying to say here is that this kind of ambitious moral stance have to be set up. And citizens, citizens should determine the true purpose of AI in much more deliberative ways than it is currently being done. If you're tackling it only at the level of regulation, well, you are subject to these, cycles of being always being late to the party. If you're not upgrading your policy systems and you are not adopting the same speed cycles to policy that are driving technology. I think that's another crucial point that I'm trying to make in the book, in the manifesto. That's
a good question. I think that in some ways, the myth of the low lagging technology has to be busted over and over again. It's a myth which is solidly anchored across the Silicon Valley, and that sits parallel with the law, what Rickers will frame as the law of exponential returns, which is also a very interesting thing to be partially debunked or at least questioned and deconstructed in terms of exponential for whom, by whom, with whom, and for what, and for whom. But in the case of the low lag, let me give you an example. When J.F. Kennedy stood on that podium in the late 1950s saying, we will go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's difficult. Trust me, we didn't know industrially, technologically, how we would go to the moon. And techno-scientifically, we had some intuitions, of course, and some basic knowledge and projections, but we were very far from knowing what we would be doing. When DARPA, programs after programs, and I'm talking about the government, and so enabled by legislators, by US Congress, with appropriation, program after program charted the course of what the digital techno-scientific revolution would be. What was this? When CERN, which again was a result of, in a way, partially we can discuss that, a similar process was charting the way. I think that at times we probably need to look at what is really exponential, and not everything is exponential. What Elon Musk achieved is not exponential. According to certain analytic frameworks, according to some others, it could be, but it's always relative. And second, what's really the role of private companies? When we hear Page and so Google co-founder is saying, I think 7 years ago, that the money, the long-term, high-risk patient capital, which is very much what is needed for disruptive technoscientific innovation or technoscientific invention, because innovation is the process of taking all of this into the market. When they would say, out of all the might of Google at the time, in the hype of the singularitarian, I would say, hopes, like when Ray Kurzweil just at the joined Google, they would come around and say, well, if you were asking us, we could put $100 million in long-term high-risk patient capital. That's peanuts. You can do nothing with
that. Absolutely.
And only the taxpayers, meaning yours and my kids and grandkids, intermediated by the power of financial market and the sovereign, has the power to muster not 100 million, but at least 100 billion, at the very least. The cost of cracking the human brain is more or less, in that raw order of magnitude. That's why, I think it's important to question that low lag. And my final point on that is, what is coming back to what I was hearing with Vera Jourova, what is the general data protection regulation, if not a law that projects the field of technology? Well, technology had to come around and say, we will comply. And Article 22 of GDPR mandating the explainability of algorithm is basically throwing a huge challenge at computer scientists. When this was published, we organized an event at the Kennedy School where I basically brought some of the best AI engineers and researchers from Harvard, from the School of Engineering, to get them on stage to say, we can't do that. In the age of deep neural networks, very deep neural networks, explainability would be impossible. Well, impossible for whom? What's the price of explainability? What's the time cycle? Yeah. If I was to put on your table, not the mere millions of US dollars that you have been able to enjoy because you were underfunded, but billions, what will be your answer? So that too is GDPR in that sense is throwing a huge challenge and leveraging the critical mass of the European market to create the conditions for that techno-scientific challenge to be upheld. And maybe what's coming up with the AI white paper from, again, the European Commission with the Brussels effect will play a similar role. I don't know.
You have been talking about a lot of the things that are Omar's domain, going to the moon, and DARPA and that. So if you would like to react to that, Omar, feel free to, and then I will react.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that's the thing about doing a moonshot. That's where the term moonshot came from. It's something we don't know much about. We don't have technology right now. It's a challenge that you put together and you say, we're going to do that and move forward with it. So I think longevity and reaching longevity above 120, 130 years, that's a moonshot that we can definitely being able to do that. But I think, I was thinking about that today, about the data that you mentioned, and Nicolas. I think data is really, really essential, very, very important component. So, and actually we're talking about one of the business models in the future is you get paid for the data. I mean, we think we are users of the social media. We are their product, actually. We are the product. We are they are selling us. We're using it, or they take our data and making money out of it. So one of the elements is can be maybe monetize your own data. Can we put strict guidelines about how this data is being used? Who has control over that? Is it the private industry? Can people trust that? Is it the government take care of that? Can the people trust the government? So it's one of these elements that I think we need to, it's one of the biggest challenges I think we have this century is how do we do with the data? What do we do with it? Who controls it? You know, how do we put safeguards to make sure it's not used in the bad ways? And it's not clear right now. It's something that we need to think and put our collective intellect as a whole community and tackle and have serious discussion about this topic. It's really very important.
So go ahead.
Maybe ladies and gentlemen, if you have, I'm sure you have tons of questions as well. Feel free to.
Can I say one thing before? So to your point, Nico, and that I'm going to be very fast about it. So I spent half of my professional life in Silicon Valley, half of it in Europe. So I understand both of these viewpoints. I understand what the European Commission want out of it. I understand the Silicon Valley companies. I think that, you know, finding that kind of actionable common ground between them and getting out of the catch me if you can type of a philosophy that Silicon Valley is playing, and we will punitively regulate you that sometimes the European Commission falls back onto, that's the cycle that we need to break. So I'm admiring, regarding the European Commission, I'm admiring that they are trying to get to a vision that is also some kind of a civilization or moral leadership about the true role of AI. Still at the same time, they are trapped in that catch-up game because they need to deal with, you know, big technology from Silicon Valley, who is pushing more and more regulation. More and more technology that are calling for regulation. I see some very impressive developments in the last few months when industry has realized finally that, you know, some of the technologies that they are producing are not fit for the market or should be banned entirely. And they have also realized that there is a number of startups that are coming out, some of them state-sponsored, some of them not trying to get a lot of visibility with their solutions, that are actually casting AI into a very negative way. So the interest of big technology right now is actually to work closer with government and to fend off all these nefarious applications of AI as they are possible. Are we there yet? No. There are some promising signs that something like that can come together. But the last point I wanted to make, and that's just one sentence, that I think that kind of structure that we are envisioning should be both research, should be that kind of monitoring, steering purpose, but at the same time, it should develop public interest artificial intelligence technology. And I think that that kind of organization that is fulfilling these three roles of, you know, research, education, and doing and developing technology is sorely lacking right now. So that's the point.
Something that we're trying to do in our own scope, I guess, as well.
Lovely.
Yeah, research, education, and developing solutions with artificial intelligence for public good in a way. Well, there is a lot to talk about for me. And I just wanted to, go back to your point about what is AI. And I think it's challenging to talk about AI because it's a science, business, and also mythology. And these three aspects are intertwined, and in the book as well. And on the one hand, that is what makes the beauty of it. On the other hand, that is also what makes it utterly challenging. And yeah, even when now we're talking about it, I think potential, expectations, the real capabilities and aspirations are quite merged in a way. So I had several things that I wanted to expand on, but I think what you have, you say also in the chapter 3, I think in the book, that you met a lot of people from the industry, a lot of policymakers, researchers, so basically all important actors shaping AI globally in a way. And you also talk about the power principles and structures, and you ask the question that is very important of who gets to shape AI. So I wanted to ask you, who gets to shape AI in your opinion, and in the opinion of policymakers and in the opinion of private sector leaders, who gets to shape AI. So what each group, though they're not homogeneous and they cannot be generalized, but according to your intuition and your interactions, be it formal, informal, what do they think about this question and what you think?
So the current equation is, I think pretty much, and I'm talking about this moment, is that, you know, technology, which is a combination of big tech and startups, are driving that shape in the commercial realm, and definitely some states with ill intentions are driving it in the non-commercial. So in the short run, I think that some of the questionable forces are winning. That's one of the negative statements that I wanted to make, and that's why we need to come together across sectors to change that equation, because the power principles that you just mentioned are all hinting at the possibility that concentration of resources and not caring that much about values that are the fundamental building blocks of democratic societies are putting some powers in an advantageous position with AI, simply because others are held back by values or regulation or citizen or consumer backlash. And therefore, that kind of formulating a vision and strengthening that vision with models that are competitive with these questionable uses of artificial intelligence, be it, you know, the extremely radical examples of autonomous weapon systems, or the less, you know, nefarious but still very edgy and questionable surveillance systems or citizen operating systems that some countries are now piloting. They have a chance to attract a lot of states that are currently on the fence about building their AI vision, or not even, I wouldn't even call it AI vision, determining the path that they are taking. So I think one of the primary reasons of us writing the book is that vision-wise, we are in catch-up mode with the ones that they are dictating the pace. And the only way to fight that is to build another actionable vision and the structures that are capable of serving an alternative model that is core to the values that build our societies.
So who is the we and they in this? Can we expand on?
Who is we? So basically, I mean, I'm not. What we are trying to say in the book and the perspective I'm having is that, you know, I'm a child of the West. I was born in Central and Eastern Europe, but the principles and values that I'm sharing are that of you know, democratic societies. So a lot of the work, and that's actually what brought Nicolas and myself together, is about protecting and upgrading democracies to be more resilient against this wave of transformation that we're getting. So that's the we. The we is the values that we share in democratic countries. And after all, the vision that we should have is civilizational in magnitude. That's what I believe.
And then views, what you talked about is in whose image or who's creating it. And I think that has also time scale associated with it. So maybe it starts with the influence of certain entities, but when it becomes ubiquitous and across the world, it has to change differently. And look at the driverless cars, for example. It's technology, people are developing the technology by itself, but then when it comes to ethical implications and laws that could be applied at the global scale, it's no longer up to them. It's up to a broader discussion, right? So I think there's a scale where initially people have their own footprint, but then it changes and adapts and modifies. Others expands and gets broader global implications.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the team?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to formulate this. In the case of, so I guess the autonomous cars is an obvious case where even consulting broader society doesn't really give a clear answer of how to define the ethical rules of how these machines must behave. So I'm wondering really if the new age of AI doesn't also kind of necessitate redefining some norms of ethical, and accepting that there are some things that we can't necessarily control in the same way that we've thought of trying to control machines in the past. I'm not sure that this makes sense, but I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
It does make sense, Nicola. So that absolutely, I would say 100%. You need to consider ethical implications, and even there's a lot of research on emotional intelligence as well that's being translated into artificial systems. But the question that I have is, and let's say we do that, and once we reach the level of artificial super intelligence, where the systems can actually change and adapt and mutate by themselves, with those boundary conditions that we implemented at the beginning, will they still relevant as these systems mutate and mature into a different scale? That's kind of the question that I ask myself, and the answer is we have no idea.
Well, thanks a lot. We'll have to wrap up, but I really want to thank you for joining us today and for this conversation. Good luck on the work around promoting and enhancing the book. As you said at the beginning, I think Omar or George, these are never-ending endeavor. In a way, yes, there should be at times one needs to publish and finish up, but the moment you have finished and published, you know that in a way it's already a bit obsolete, and especially in the field of AI and society and governance, where an increasing number of people, including us, trying to contribute to building the future society in the age of AI and other emerging tech.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Look forward to meeting you in person, hopefully this year in the Valley or in Texas or in Florida and somewhere. Fair enough.
Okay, it's a pleasure meeting all of you guys.
Thanks for joining us. Appreciate that.